So imagine you've had a very busy clinical day, just pretend you're clinicians, and you've met all these wonderful people and you've listened to their story, and it's 4 o'clock and you're feeling a little bit tired, but you've got one last person to see, some crazy Irish guy who's going to come in and try and tell you his truth. And you want to try and give it the same attention as you gave all the other people, okay? I know it's late. Thank you. So, I don't know if you're familiar with this. I'm mad as hell and I am not gonna take this anymore. The reason I am here is because I am angry. I am angry about the treatment of people in the mental health system, in particular those in extreme states or psychosis. I am angry about the over-medicalization of extreme polypharmacy, about people being left on medication without review. Pat called it chemical hibernation, and left on high doses without fully understanding the long-term consequences. I'm angry about people not getting access to specialized psychotherapy that could help them, and I hoped I might be amongst a few friends. Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. In 2023, with unsurpassed access to research, information and survivors' accounts about effective interventions and support, why are we not doing better? When it comes to those most marginalized in the system, there appears to be a deficit in common sense, compassion, communication, and collaboration in favor of the hierarchical biopsychiatric model and the rapid McDonaldization of care. So today, I want to take this anger and I want to offer you something more creative. I want to offer you my humanity and solidarity, sharing my professional journey from 5 countries. I want to highlight, among others, the influence of the Scottish psychiatrist Laing on my thought and on my work. And I'm going to make a radical but simple proposal that the humane or compassionate treatment of others can be healing. We live in a world of soundbites, clickbait, TikTok. If I was pushed to offer one line that conveyed the treatment sensibility of Ronnie Laing and myself, it would be this one, and I quote, "The heart of the matter is open-heartedness. The heart of the matter is open-heartedness." He continues, "Only by the openness of one's heart to those who come to us as patients can we expect their hearts to settle down from the varieties of terror and trepidation, consternation and panic which they bring with them." I have reappropriated the term patient. To me, it indicates a degree of suffering. A patient is someone just like me, but who is suffering even more. It also reminds me that this work requires great patience. So, we're going to go on a journey, right? I'm going to take you back to where I grew up, back to Belfast, Northern Ireland. I'm going to take you to the 1990s. I had my existence. I was there, me in place in me. Seamus Healy. Sorry, Seamus. I was a child of the Troubles, the armed conflict that raged from the 70s to the end of the 90s. I was a deeply sensitive and empathetic child, but after 21 years of living in these conditions, I was on the verge of being killed, killing someone else, or killing myself. Then something curious happened. I was visiting a friend that I met in the north of England, and she invited me to a rave. She said she would be taking a pill called ecstasy and asked would I like to try it. The experience I had could only be described as a blowing open of my heart, a sense of connection beyond egoic consciousness, and a deep sense of love that I had never felt before. It was like a new emotion rushing over me. Back in Belfast, I found my way into the underground rave scene where Protestants and Catholics were hugging and connecting on the dance floor for the very first time. It would be like people from Gaza connecting and dancing with people from Israel. So ironically, magically, the high quality ecstasy or MDMA people were taking, it was referred to as white doves, which you see one there, a sign of peace for many and a coincidental allusion to the peace process that was about to follow. So it was after one of these raves that I was at an after party with a man called Peter. And in the early hours of the morning, he told me his story. And it was a magical story. It was full of myths, legends, and archetypes. He was an uneducated, working class Irish Republican who shared his story of geometry, Greek gods, rolling the dice with the devil for his soul, and astral time travel. He believed that the earth was tilted at the wrong angle, but with insight into true geometry, he had plans to correct this and bring the world back to a peaceful and harmonious time in history. As a compelling Shanachie, or Irish storyteller, he had the delivery of a custodian of oral wisdom. But what really caught my attention was he told me he used to risk his life going into police stations to tell his story. This would be like a Hamas-leaning Palestinian walking into an Israeli army base. He believed that only a Freemason could understand. His logic was sound. Symbolic geometry was a central component of Freemasonry, and a significant number of the security forces were amongst its brethren. I knew this because unknown to anyone at the party, like my father, his father, Oscar Wilde, and W.B. Yeats, at the time I was a secret Freemason. It was my first experience of earth-moving synchronicity. In fact, it was Peter who introduced me to the concept. A combination of the times, the drugs, and as Timothy Leary would say, set and setting made the whole experience shamanic. At the end of the few hours, he told me something shocking. He had been incarcerated for 3 months against his will in a hospital. His crime, apparently, he told the widow of his best friend at his wake that he could bring him back to life. So this is going to be difficult. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. Did I sing it?
Wait, actually, Dr. Michael, do you
Yes.
mind can you talk into it like you would be eating a microphone, or eating an ice cream cone? There you go.
Like this?
Yeah, it's much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's much better.
So what he told me next changed the course of my thinking and my life. He said that at no time during the 3 months had anyone asked him his story. I just couldn't get my head around this treatment of someone so fascinating and lucid. Oscar Wilde lamented, and the wild regrets and the bloody sweats, none knew so well as I, for he who lives more lives than one, more deaths than one must die. So fast forward, past many adventures and near-death experiences in London. I was on a social work internship on a community mental health team, and I felt absolute despair from witnessing the coercive medicalization of human suffering.
Michael, you're up the hook with the mic. Let's make it worse.
Okay. I can try and talk. Can we bring that a bit closer?
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you.
If the I'm already lying. Okay, London. I was on a social work internship. Yeah, total despair, and through my eyes, it was just brutal. Just couldn't understand it. I became organically anti-psychiatric. Samuel Beckett wrote, "You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on." So I desperately sought answers from outside my course's curriculum, and I stumbled across the newly republished biography of R.D. Laing, A Life, by his son, Adrian. It was like seeing the light. Laing was at one point the most famous psychiatrist in the world. His most famous book of many was The Divided Self. He set up the first communities where therapists and patients lived together, often without the need for medication. I literally threw the book down and walked to Kingsley Hall from my house in East London. 50 years had passed, but I still wanted to see the site of such emancipatory innovation. Such was the inspiration. Something was unleashed. I devoured Laing and saw the whole system in a completely new light. What inspired me so much was primarily his idea that treatment is basically how we treat others. He gave relevance to compassion and care over coercion and control. I stumbled across another book that had a profound influence, Post-Psychiatry, Mental Health in a Postmodern World by Pat Bracken and Phil Thomas. Through this book, I was turned on to the phenomenology of Jaspers, the phenomenology of psychopathology, that did a great service in organizing the form of psychotic symptoms, but in the process excluded the content. It was an epiphany. I finally realized why the hospital was not interested in Peter's story and why even the exploration of the content of form was discouraged. People were ignored in the belief that talking to them would exasperate their psychosis. Have you ever heard anything as negating as that? The lack of human connection and touch when you need it the most. Iatrogenic at its core. As Bertrand Caron argued, psychosis without psychotherapy is a tragedy, treatment without understanding. So Laing jumped off the page. He did the opposite. Not only did he listen and try and understand, but more importantly, he believed. Post-psychiatry also introduced me to the hermeneutics of distress and hermeneutic phenomenology through the introduction of Heidegger, a philosopher that I've been trying to get out of my life ever since with no success. My colleagues respected my passion, but the older ones, some of whom were aware of Laing, were not convinced. One glimmer of hope came from a senior psychologist who had the audacity to present the Garrity model of cognitive symptoms of psychosis as a future cure, but something was coming in that maybe talking could be good. He was sympathetic to my awakening and took me to myself and a colleague to a day trip to a rural abandoned asylum where he used to work. And he urged us never ever let the abuse that he witnessed happen again. He was kind of passing on mantle. A professor who also saw my spark handed me a paper that I still share to this day, Recovery and the Conspiracy of Hope by Pat Deegan. How amazing is that here? In the face of such pessimism and oppression through bio approaches to psychosis, it evoked a call for solidarity towards a revolution of hope and recovery, reclaiming the human beyond the reductive label, replacing despair with hope and apathy with care. So I went from a state of despair to an amped activist wanting to make the concept of post-psychiatry a reality. I honestly felt that Laing was my mentor and my guide. This is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but we shared many deep connections together, not least of which we came from that curious Scots-Irish background. My parents remain devout Presbyterians. We both served in the army. We both trained in the Tavistock. We both worked in the National Health System. He was a keen meditator, as I have been for 25 years. He had a friendship and connection with Trungpa Rinpoche, who I still consider one of my earlier teachers. He also gave talks at the Esalen Institute, and I'll skip over the alcohol and the drugs. So on this team, he provided me with the confidence to think critically about treatment. I witnessed the carnage that the liberal use of neuroleptic medication was having on vulnerable people with little or no voice in their own care. I prefer the older term neuroleptic because the term anti-psychotic gives the impression that they work. The devastating impact of rapid weight gain, akathisia, dystonia, Parkinsonism, tremors, lactation, and lethargy, all seen through virgin eyes. But it revealed something curious to me. It revealed why those labelled mad might not look the same as the average person. Ronnie whispered in my ear, "These are not the side effects, these are the effects of the medication." It was like waking up in a nightmare and realizing you no longer had to face it alone. Insanity is a minority of one. Wherever I was in the world, I made a point of sending Peter a card once a year with a white dove on the front, a symbol celebrating our still dangerous cross-community connection. He told me it was the only Christmas card anyone ever sent him. In 2008, fearing that he would once again be sectioned, Peter took his own life. What treatment did he fear that would be worse than dying? Well, having seen the loss of liberty and agency at the hands of the state-sanctioned healthcare system, I began to understand. In addition to involuntary admissions, I witnessed what we call community treatment orders. Basically, you complied with a depot injection of slow-release neuroleptic, or you return to hospital. It seemed no coincidence to me that these orders appear to be particularly frequent in those already marginalised in the community, the socially disadvantaged, often from BIPOC and immigrant communities. At the time, the psychologist Richard Bentel made an extensively researched case that social deprivation, disadvantage and exclusion in London were the biggest predictor of psychosis. His work was also a source of much inspiration, but inspiration is nothing without the action to accompany it. I knew I had to get skin in the game. I already had a disadvantage of having an Irish accent and clearly not from a middle-class background. Additionally, I realised that the lead psychiatrist would exclude people from serious discussion of treatment by the use of exclusive medical language. So I purchased a copy of the Oxford Dictionary of Psychiatry and read it over the weekend. Within 2 weeks, I was now the first person to be called on a ward round, sometimes with as many as 10 people present. I don't know whether it's the same in America, but they have this horrible thing where people have to shuffle into a room with interns and oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So my new ability to use the lingo gained me access to the club. I was finally able to advocate on my patients' behalf. Those who were hastily labelled incoherent were often, in fact, hilarious and on point. If you only took the time to realise that because of the heavy medication, they were one answer behind the question. Speaking up for the strong, young black men labelled aggressive by the irritating middle-class psychiatrists who wielded their power. I worked creatively to try to restore a sense of humanity, whereas those dishevelled beings often shuffling into a den of thieves. I remember this look of disbelief on the faces when I asked the lead psychiatrist to indulge me as I placed the ghetto blaster in the middle of the floor when I pressed play. The angelic tones of a cover version of the Look of Love bellowed out, much to the puzzled faces of my colleagues. That is who you're going to see next. It wasn't much, but it was something. Love is all you need. Laing helped me to understand more deeply the injustice and the injustice and the lack of care in the system. When I reappraise what he was highlighting, I find the work of Miranda Fricker and her concept of epistemic injustice really helpful. I've already mentioned my experience of the undervaluing of my professional voice and potentially the patients that I represented due to the exclusion and excluding language. Fricker breaks down the concept of epistemic justice into two important categories: testimonial injustice and hermeneutical injustice. Testimonial injustice is when somebody's word is not trusted or ignored because they have been labelled psychotic. Hermeneutical injustice is when somebody's experience is not well understood because they don't fit any concepts known to them or others. So Thinking about it a bit more technically, Laing offered me three main themes of understanding when I think how to work with others. The first is contextual understanding. He opened the door to social intelligibility. It went way beyond the spurious and reductive idea of simply a chemical imbalance. Laing argued that psychosis cannot be understood without understanding despair. Whilst wishing to avoid romanticization, just reflecting on the possibility that psychosis was a way to make the unlivable situation livable, he created a powerful paradigm shift. He argued that the signs and symptoms are more socially intelligible than had come to be supposed. This opened the door for me to see the links between trauma, loss, heartbreak, and psychosis. Where he veered into the subtle areas and dynamics of mystification, deception, and invalidation, I was confronted with the overwhelming impact of childhood emotional, physical, and sexual abuse in the psyche. Freud, you may be surprised, also arrived at this place, as evidenced by his unredacted letters to Fleiss, when he discussed the intrinsic genuineness of infantile trauma. He even went as far to propose a new motto for psychoanalysis. What have they done to you, poor child? Psychosis is a wholly human experience, a human experience in trouble. Laing launched me into a relationship with early complex trauma and the relationship with adult distress. Clinicians can get so confused when they approach psychosis. They try and apply their everyday logic to a person who is consumed with the emotional logic of distress. People in distress need people and places who can offer safety. What happened to the oath? First, do no harm. So the other theme is existential understanding. When considering the existential understanding of treatment, Laing and find my understanding of phenomenology, describing it as an attempt to release our minds from the bland, uncritical attachment to any set of miserable meanings, right or wrong, true or false, and his attention to the contextual or environmental impact on the patient addressed many of the criticisms of Gadamer phenomenology. Perhaps the term social phenomenology needs to be amplified in order to demarcate the power of Laing's reading. The contextual and existential understanding of treatment shifted my overarching questions to the patients from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you to help me understand what that experience is like for you. It fundamentally shifted my relatedness to others in distress. So the third thing is relational understanding. When considering a relational understanding of treatment, he taught me the centrality of really listening, to be willing to encounter the pain and suffering that is universal, to let it breathe. The influence of Harry Stack Sullivan was evident in his approach to the most complex and hard to reach patients. He demonstrated that they were much more human than otherwise. I use the metaphor to describe his approach and mine to the clinical encounter as the willingness to sit on the floor with others. In the Dzogchen tradition, there's a saying, the higher the teaching, the lower the throne. He demonstrated how not to hide behind the role of the professional, but to bond in our inevitable existential givens. Many people can listen, but Laing showed me the power of also believing. He believed the despair, the terror, the angst that people shared, and he did not simply pathologize it away. He said psychotherapy must remain an obstinate attempt of two people to recover the wholeness of being human through the relationship between them. Later in his life, he discussed in more detail the concept of relatedness or co-presence, highlighting the interplay between the interpersonal, and transpersonal. He described a meditative conversation, not going into separate worlds, the sense of a shared experience, a coming together in a reflective mood, an unspoken communion a communion of love. In the moment of love, our empty essence nakedly dawns, allowing the transpersonal field to be recognized. Laing attempted to counter the lack of love in ethics in the scientific framework of psychiatry by attempting to combine the science of the heart and that of relatedness. Bono, or Jesus, as we call him in Ireland, sang, "You gotta cry without weeping, talk without speaking, scream without raising your voice."
Sing it, girl, sing it.
After
Okay.
I pose the same question that Laing asked in every group I run. Where in society can you go to scream? I offer an invitation into a space where people don't fear the possibility of being sectioned when they disclose their most intimate fear and pain, where they can scream back into the world. Laing gave me the confidence to do so. So my journey continues. Off I went to Malaysia with my family. I was following my partner as she tried to take over the world. So I spent 4 years in Malaysia. I met some of the most incredibly hospitable and friendly people I've ever met, with quite possibly some of the best food in the world. While less intimidating than living in England, it did require an immersion experience in a vibrant culture, or more accurately, cultures. I witnessed the relationship between people in distress and Indigenous healers. My cultural conditioning was challenged daily, from encountering seemingly strange superstitions and practices to government schools being closed at the sighting of hungry ghosts. I remained open to learning. I volunteered in a busy NGO, and it was my first experience of polypharmacy. I offered patients the chance to bring me in their medications. They brought medications for every ailment and medication for the side effects. Supporting people who came off meds was probably the most powerful intervention that I witnessed. I remember people telling me that they thought someone was putting something in their food. As paranoid as it sounded, Laing had taught me to listen and to believe. I kept exploring. Another member told me the same thing. I asked the head of the NGO what they thought, and without hesitation and blinking an eye, they said, "Yes, we're putting the medication in the food."
Oh.
This is what the drug companies told us to do. And please don't tell anyone, as this is what I'm also doing with my son. So after much unsuccessful protest, remember I was a visitor, my position became untenable and I left. But I had witnessed beautiful and unique people being pathologized, medicated, ECT'd for underachievement, gender fluidity, sexuality, or just being different. The pervasiveness of Western scientific ideology and the grip of big pharma on information was not a conspiracy, it was a fact. So I moved on and I supported Malaysia's version of Doctors Without Borders, developing a psychosocial program for first responders. I also worked with the NGO Protect and Save Children, supporting people face the unimaginable horror of working with abused children. Witnessing and holding trauma became a specialism. Psychosis remained a passion. There's not much difference. So, unfortunately, I went back to England. I'm only joking. It's an Irish thing. So I eventually went back to England. I was determined to research early intervention with first psychosis. I thought I knew something. I joined an early intervention team and I was immediately met with the reality that my dream of offering innovative and compassionate treatment was shattered. I witnessed even more coercion and lack of care than before. I was shocked by how much medicalization was taking place. Where was the love? People were being medicated for the mildest of drug-induced perceptual changes, referred to as lazy because they were coping with enough meds to knock out a horse. I quickly realized that no one on the young team had any experience of psychedelics, but yet could make pronouncements on what was and what was not hallucination. At a team meeting, I asked for the details of a hearing voices group. The lead psychiatrist told me, "It is the job of this team to eradicate voices." How right he was. The team leader, a social worker, was meant to be the psychosocial dialect to the medical model, but sadly he was in collusion, and therefore no alternative voice could get through. So my dream was crushed. I did not think I could ever tackle the power of psychiatry, and left to focus on further clinical training. So, having trained at Regents for many years, I became a bit disillusioned with the British existential elitist disavowal of psychoanalysis, and with it the concepts of transference, counter-transference, and even unconscious. So I had an invitation to join a new forensic psychoanalytic training at the Tavistock and Portland Clinic. John Heaton said that Laing felt that Tavistock was soulless. Despite deep pockets of brilliant, he wasn't far wrong. It was a broad spectrum with greats like Peter Fonagy at one end and people that I would not want to be in a room with alone the other. Toward the end of my training, a beast of a supervisor berated me for not using enough psychoanalytic lingo in my case presentation. "You mean like narcissistic envy?" I wondered. They said I was a storyteller, telling stories about patients' lives. It was one of the most validating things. Yes, I thought, this is exactly what I wanted to be, a shanachie or storyteller. I certainly did want to give voice to the voiceless, to help people think the unthinkable and say the unsayable. I believe that creating spaces where they could do so was the treatment and the essence of healing. I wanted to witness and give birth to their pain. I wanted psychoanalytic theory and language to support this process and not to hinder it. The abuse of jargon can let a cold, compassionless clinician hide behind the veil of silence or unresponsiveness. My patient, who she referred to as a pervert, in the most derogatory and not clinical way, came from a Middle Eastern background and was wrestling tragically with his own sexuality, despite enjoying the freedom of London. Laing taught me not to divorce him from his context. If one listened, his behaviour became so much more intelligible, much more human than my supervisor had supposed. So I took the best of what I experienced at Tavistock and moved to Germany. And I had the most curious experience of seeing my German patients, or seeing many German patients that preferred the experience of psychotherapy in Belfast English. One of the most demanding and interesting aspects of being a travelling mental health professional is often expats and locals will seek your support in extreme circumstances. From sudden tragic deaths to wild teenage acting out to crazed adult extramarital affairs, the impromptu role sometimes felt a little closer to that of a parish priest. But whilst in Hamburg, a man phoned me in the middle of the night. He asked me to help his wife, who he thought was going psychotic. When I met with her, she explained in heartbreaking detail that she recently had told her long-term lover that she loved him, at which point he immediately moved off their tryst. Her brokenheartedness was palpable. She got a little worse before she got better, and she asked me to rendezvous with her at the local psychiatric hospital. As I drove to this intimidating campus, I became increasingly adverse to the dark Gothic architecture. I was imagining all sorts of horrors inside. I called her, met her in the canteen. She had had the same visceral response. We chuckled at our shared dilemma. The raw humanity was palpable. But the irony of the situation was we took the decision to proceed and we met with a psychiatrist, and it was one of the most compassionate and contemporary assessments that I'd ever witnessed. Through various other encounters, my faith in psychiatry was increased mildly. I shifted from a position of anti-psychiatry to that of anti-bad psychiatry. So the next country I moved to was Chicago. If you're not from here, each country is different, right? They have their own pizzas, their own ways of driving, their own varying degrees of friendliness. But in Chicago, I completed a significant piece of research on clinicians' use of silence. I interviewed seasoned practitioners that collectively held over 900 years of experience. In addition to their contemporary relationship with silence, what really fascinated me was their perspective on what they now believed was the most healing aspect of treatment. More or less universally, it was the focus on the needs of the individual patient and moments when they were able to convey actual care, often drawing from Winnicott's theoretical shift from an emphasis on interpretation to that of the relationship, presence, and holding. I was so inspired by their approach and absolute dedication to their patients, even after many decades in the field. Despite choosing to use the couch less and having a strong existential sensibility, I did retain a degree of reservedness in my clinical practice. It was the way I was trained. Having taken a sabbatical to complete the research and following much reassessment, I decided to consciously test this revised approach, distilled from the experience of my research participants. The first patient experienced the new me. Metaphorically, and in the shadow of Laing, I got on the floor with my patient. I was more real and creative and explicitly caring than I have ever had the confidence to be. In the words of Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everyone else is taken. I have never looked back. So now I'm living in another country, and Massachusetts. It has one of the most cutting edge areas for medicine, biotech, robotics, psychology, psychotherapy. And I'd like to bring you good news. So I can bring you some good news. The agency that I work for is very much underpinned with an evolving philosophy that prizes compassion, care, and autonomy for the patient. There is kindness and a high level of contemporary professionalism. I'm afforded ample freedom to develop treatment approaches to complex trauma and psychosis. There is also emerging attempts where the open dialogue approach, if not delivered with fidelity, at least offers spaces where alternative voices are able to be heard. So the bad news is that I once again am moving towards being vehemently anti-psychiatric. The prevalence of polypharmacy way exceeds what I witnessed in Malaysia. The prescribing of high doses of combined neuroleptic medication, accompanied at times with lithium, several powerful antidepressants, a benzo, a stimulant, and of course a few pills for the side effects. It beggars belief. It challenges all common sense, flies in the face of practice-based evidence. When challenging senior psychiatrists, I'm often met with the defense of big pharma-sponsored research. It's safe to give somebody with psychosis a stimulant and a benzo, they'll argue. They have drunk the Kool-Aid. I would like to pass a new law that stated no prescriber could suggest a drug cocktail that they had not first tried themselves. If anyone protests, are you trying to kill me? I will respond, are you trying to kill the patient? I am not anti-medication. I am anti-people being left on a cocktail of meds indefinitely without a critical review beyond a 20-minute check-in. It's not the prescriber's fault. It's part of the McDonaldization of care. So there's much contemporary evidence that supports the argument that Laing was way ahead of his time. There's growing evidence indicating the long-term use of neuroleptics is less effective than the short-term use. There's emerging evidence about the longer-term impact on brain functioning. There's recent research that indicates that psychiatrists still often avoid discussing psychotic symptoms with their patients. There's research to support the idea that personality and psychopathology are best conceptualized as a dynamic attempt at adaptation. Renewed philosophical insights into the idea of psychosis as a strategy to survive, research into childhood trauma, and renewed arguments on the political reality of social labels, and that psychotherapy for psychosis is effective. But the medical model is so entrenched, so pervasive, big pharma has its tentacles everywhere, and our patients deserve, at the very least, to hear an alternative and critically informed voice. On paper, the consensus formulation of psychosis may be a biopsychosocial model, but in reality, the bio dominates in perceived clinical hierarchy. Therapy, if you're lucky, is but an add-on. Putting aside any arguments about the efficacy of medication, the singular focus can raise attention to the social aspects of racism, injustice, oppression, exclusion, trauma, stigma, and a lack of social resources. I am not depressed, I'm just tired of being misgendered. I am not anxious, I'm just really struggling in a heteronormative workplace. I am not manic, I just don't want to get fired from this job. I am not psychotic, I just feel so overwhelmed by the racial violence in this world and no one is listening. Sure, take this pill, you'll be fine. Next. There isn't time to talk about the coercive and controlling aspects of bio-focused treatment, but it still very much exists today. But the growing dominance and focus on the bio in both psychiatry and psychology leads me to believe that Laing is as relevant as ever. The other reason that I think he remains relevant is the rapid growth in the McDonaldization of care and psychotherapy. McDonaldization is the process by which the foundational principles of the fast food restaurant industry are being embraced in all aspects of society. It comes from the work of George Ritzer, Donna Dustin, and myself. The prevalence of the four core dimensions of McDonaldization can be seen across all sectors: efficiency, predictability, calculability, and control. Examples can be found in Starbucks, Walmart, Disneyland, colleges, gyms, as well as human service agencies, hospitals, and professional bodies. The four dimensions could be summarized by the management slogan: if it's not measurable, it does not exist. The fifth dimension of McDonaldization is the irrationality of rationality, the unforeseen consequences of attempting to oppose order. And most importantly for therapy, these can manifest as dehumanizing, de-skilling, irresponsibilizing, and disenchantment. The concept of patience is another major casualty of McDonaldization. Insurance companies and agencies don't really want therapy. They want quick solutions to problems, formulated to medical necessity and trackable by tick box software. A perfect accompaniment to the codable categories of DSM-5. Patients and families are also being conditioned to seek the same quick answers. So, in the face of McDonaldization, what is the antidote? What is treatment and healing in the 21st century? The heart of the matter is from heartedness. Returning to Laing, his original quote, I think we need therapy and care that comes from this place. Bertrand Caron was a psychologist and beloved member of ISPS. His work remains invaluable. He shares the same humanistic view of those in states of distress as Laing. He appreciated that whilst there can be similarities between the manifest forms of suffering, each individual's experience is unique. If we over-pathologize or jargonize or overly theorize, we lose most of what is happening to the person. The patient needs to know that the therapist can and will help, will be interested in what might be going on from their perspective and not from theory alone. He offers much in terms of direct clinical approaches. I discovered him late in my journey, but found it validating that our approaches were so similar. I don't treat psychosis. I encounter people. I specialize in having personal clinical encounters with those in states of extreme distress, despair, confusion, and complex trauma. I metaphorically reach out my hand through all labels and assumptions to touch the humanity that we all share. After a long period of building trust, I may, if appropriately, gently try to make symbolic sense of some of the least sense-making beliefs and experiences. I may dialogically offer new words to experiences. Lots of clinicians can get excited about the mysticism surrounding spiritual emergencies, but can they also look into the rubble of the catastrophic destruction of worlds without blinking? To not look away surely is the treatment and the healing that people seek. Berniko Nolte describes this as authentic care, openness, spontaneity, accessibility, and directness. Laing and those existentialists who influenced him would have referred to this as authenticity. Patients are not problems or cases to be solved, but great beings to be personally encountered. That is at the heart of the existential psychoanalytic sensibility and part of the antidote to the commodification of care, the importance of enchantment. And I don't think this revolution of hope and recovery will emerge by fighting the power of psychiatry and big pharma head on, but actually sidestepping it with a more grassroots, bottom-up approach. Laing continues, the way each person must take to emerge from their nightmare is unique. In much of my work with people experiencing psychosis, I will be in the realm of dreams or indeed nightmares. This is a sacred space, and I am but a guest in their realms. The words of Yeats' famous poem are always front of mind. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. The wonder and awe of dreams are hard to McDonaldize. The realm of linear causality has been transcended. The desire for a quick fix by the patient can be somewhat alleviated by the powerful experience of a true, personal, sympathetic, and dialogical encounter, of being with someone who can bear the nightmares and look into the abyss. Laing continues, it is this movement, the movement that they are already taking, which one must intuitively sense. So that, essentially speaking, all one then has to do is to remove whatever obstacles one has the capacity to remove in order that the movement can happen and to trust it. He speaks of intuition, of sensing, of movement, of collaboration, of trust, of some sense that the patient knows what they are doing. It speaks to their autonomy and the potential for regaining agency. Movement, in my opinion, is closer to dance, is closer to artistry, is closer to that which cannot be manualized. So I have gratuitously peppered this presentation with Irish artists. All have guided and informed my path. But it was James Joyce who, I believe, converts the bread of everyday life into something that has a permanent artistic life of its own. Does that not speak to a form of therapy that cannot be McDonaldized? In a long forgotten book, The Existential Core of Psychoanalysis, Wiseman conveys the picture of the analyst who understands the here and now of existence is far more nuanced than any precarious generalization that we may try to attribute to it. We are in communion, in relatedness with each other, enmeshed in existence. So in conclusion, I hope I have argued convincingly that we really do know better. And I believe we need to do better. Hopefully you feel motivated to join this grassroots revolution in hope and recovery. Humanity and solidarity and humanity. My colleagues and I hope to contribute to this revolution by our further development of training and research in existential psychoanalysis. Very much in the lineage and indebted to the great late Ronnie Laing, an approach where the common sense, compassionate, caring, creative treatment of others is at the very heart of what is deemed healing in the 21st century. Thank you.